and welcome to yet another episode of Samajhdar Bano Sehat Ke Ishare Samjho, TV9 special with me Deepak Suresh Kumar in collaboration with USV, your reliable healthcare partner, and Beat Diabetes along with the Endocrine Society of India. Let me begin with something we all relate to, viewers. Most of us don't think twice before adding that extra spoon of sugar to a morning chai or enjoying a sweet after dinner. It feels normal, comforting, even harmless, but what many people don't realize is that long before diabetes is diagnosed, the body often starts sending quiet warning signals. And today we are talking about those silent sugar imbalances, the early signs we tend to ignore. And to help us understand this better is Dr. Harshita, consultant endocrinologist, Manipal Hospitals, Bengaluru, Dr. Pooja UK, endocrinologist, Tata MD Clinic, Bengaluru, Dr. Rachna Kishore U, endocrinologist, DHEE Hospitals, IGOT and Bangalore Super Specialty Center. Thank you, doctors, for being with us. Dr. Harshita, firstly, I would like to take my first question to you. As a consultant physician and diabetologist, let me begin with a very common belief. If my fasting sugar is normal, many people feel there's nothing to worry about it. Is that really true?
Not definitely. So, fasting is not just the only way by which we track our sugars. There is something also called as postprandial sugar monitoring, which is basically where you check your blood glucose 2 hours after you eat something. This is to understand what food has done to your body and whether it has caused some sugar spikes. This could also be one way of tracking, how food affects your blood glucose and everything. There is also another test called as HbA1c. So, this test tells us the average of the previous 3 months glucose fluctuations happening in our body. Putting all these three together, that is your fasting blood glucose, your post breakfast or post meal blood glucose, and HbA1c together, gives us an idea of what exactly is happening and where we are.
That's right. And Dr. Pooja, as an endocrinologist who deals with metabolic health every day, what exactly is happening inside the body at this stage when sugar imbalance is just beginning?
Your pancreas are overworking to maintain sugars in the normal level. So this is the amount of sugar if the body is maintaining. There is excess amount of insulin being produced by the pancreas, and this excess is known as insulin resistance. And though the insulin is there in the body, it is not able to act properly or respond properly, and the body's sugar levels tend to remain normal. So in immediate body signs which is there, the insulin acts as a key to open this resistance. So body weight reduction will help reduce insulin resistance.
And Dr. Rachna, from an internal medicine perspective, why is it that people don't really feel any symptoms in the early phase, even when damage may already be developing silently inside the body?
Diabetes is very rightly called as a silent disease. So many years prior to the onset of symptoms as well, the glucose level or the sugar is slowly building up in our body. So what the body is trying to do, like Dr. Pooja said, is it's trying very hard to compensate for this rise in sugar by rising your insulin level, or it's trying to adapt or adjust to this new level of sugar. So the patient per se does not feel any symptoms at this point. Maybe that is one of the reasons. And another reason is those classical symptoms we associate with diabetes, like weight loss or increased urination, all of them may occur at a certain higher threshold for this patient. And since another thing is, since patients don't feel any pain or fever, or there are no very alarming symptoms, they don't usually rush to the doctor, and so it can remain underdiagnosed at this time.
Okay, Dr. Harshita, before I come to you, there's a follow-up question that people on social media are also asking Dr. Rachna. And we have a question from a person called Amit. He's asking Dr. Rachna, can poor gut health or frequent antibiotic use affect sugar metabolism over time?
Yes, 100%. That's a very important question, very relevant question as well, because what we call as in medical terms the leaky gut. That's the gut is responsible for overall complete health of your body. So when there are some what we call gut dysbiosis, that it's not working properly, many substances causing inflammation, what we call as cytokines, they get released into the body. So they are one of the cause for insulin resistance, for the glucose metabolism, lipid metabolism to go haywire. So yes, maintaining gut health is one of the core things for overall metabolic health, sir.
Okay, now Dr. Harshita, when you look at Indian patients, specifically Indian patients, how common is the silent sugar imbalance among, us?
So it's globally increasing, and the same way in India also, it's alarmingly increasing. It's no longer a surprise to see people in their 20s and 30s coming with, very high blood glucoses into the OPD. On an average, you can say 10 to 15% of the population is currently either diabetic or pre-diabetic. So Indians as an ethnicity, we are at a higher risk compared to our Western counterparts because we have a higher tendency to store more fat in our abdomen region, and this fat is very inflammatory. It's not a silent fat that sits there. It goes inside all our important organs like liver, pancreas, and everything. And it causes a lot of insulin resistance and puts it at a risk of early diabetes and also at a risk of cardiovascular events. We now are seeing a lot of, news on social media platforms about young people collapsing and, some cardiovascular issues happening. The same, pathophysiology that I explained now applies to that. So, as an ethnicity, we are definitely at a higher risk of metabolic diseases.
Let me go across to Dr. Pooja Kamath. What are the early signs that people should watch out for, especially the subtle hints that the body gives before diabetes completely sets in?
So basically, these subtle signs which we say are often ignored by the patients, like frequent hunger and energy crashes after taking a meal. This is basically because of something called a reactive hypoglycemia and craving for sweets, mild weight gain around the waist. All these are subtle signs or sehat ke ishare which has to be picked up early, in which people ignore it, saying that maybe they are working late or they were overtime working, or maybe these are symptoms of not having good sleep. So all these subtle signs, when they are picked up early diagnosis helps to reverse diabetes and take it into remission. And hit early is the new key to maintain diabetes.
Dr. Pooja Kamath, Shyam is finding a lot of difficulties in joining us live, but he has a question for y'all. He has put out a question asking y'all, should people rely on home glucometers alone, or is lab testing still essential for, accurate tracking?
Actually, lab testing is the accurate method of testing of blood glucose, but home glucose monitoring helps us keep a check. So you can't always go to a lab and check, and you don't have the time, especially in this era of where you're very busy and you have to go to work. So lab testing is the ideal part, but home testing is much better so that you can keep a track of your sugars. And there is always a difference of around 10 to 20 milligram between the lab as well as the home glucose monitoring. But ADA, according to ADA, even SMPG can be used to check sugars at home.
Doctor, isn't that dangerous if 10 to 20, milligrams difference? How fatal is that, or is it, completely safe if there is a difference of 10 to 20 milligrams?
It is not like, see, sugars, especially when they are borderline, and when you have to monitor, especially in cases of gestational diabetes or pre-diabetes, or when we are tracking, when we are giving them insulin. So this home monitoring of glucose or the CGMs helps us give a record of sugars, and these are not fatal. Whenever the low sugars are there, we just ask them to repeat it once in the lab, or when the high sugars are there, we ask them to repeat it once in the lab. But in between sugars, it helps us maintain the tablet levels or the insulin levels, adjust the insulin levels. So it is not fatal. So it is just like you monitor, self-monitoring of blood glucose is important for us to streamline the treatment part, as well as to ask them to come for follow-up regularly.
That's right. And Dr. Rachna, many viewers believe that eating home food, automatically protects them. From your experience, does home food always mean safe food?
It's one of the most common things what we get asked in the OPD, that I'm having home food, but still my sugars are going so high. What I'm doing wrong? So having home food is definitely better. I 100% agree. But for the simple reason why home food is good is because we know with what ingredients we cook, with what oil we cook, how much we use, and what is the method of cooking. So all of these are important when we cook at home. But having said that, that does not completely protect us. We also need to keep in mind about the portion control and the balance of food what we're having. For instance, if you take half a plate of just carbohydrates like plain rice and a little bit of dal, that's definite. This simple home food is also going to spike your sugar. So following a plate method at this time greatly helps. Filling your plate, half of the plate should be any green leafy or non-starchy vegetables. One fourth of your plate should be just any kind of protein, beet curd, paneer or egg or chicken, and one fourth of your plate should be whole grains. So the less refined the grains, the better it is. Something like millets or quinoa or red rice or brown rice. Switching to these simple things than having plain white rice helps to get down the sugar a lot. Also, be aware about what kind of oils we use. The refined oils we use should not be used much. Try having oils which are better in omega 3, omega 6 fatty acids. So, those small changes when we do to our diet, definitely home cooked food is very good.
Also, Dr. Rachna, we have a follow-up question from Varun. Many people feel tired or thirsty often, and how do you know when it's routine fatigue and when it is sugar imbalance? How do you differentiate?
Okay. So that few things can help you, like in the sense if you have risk factors for diabetes, little bit your mind should also think about that can be one of the reasons. Like if you have a very strong family history, if you're a bit on the overweight side, bit on the obese side, or you have any signs of insulin resistance, or these kind of things help you to figure out maybe the fatigue can be a reason of high sugar as well. But fatigue is a very common symptom which can occur in even thyroid illness, which can occur in if your blood is low, if you're having anemia, or for sugar also. So depending on the risk factors you have, it's probably advisable once at least to get your sugars checked.
And you know, in the society, there are people who are following a lot of diets. A lot of them are following intermittent fasting. But Dr. Harshita, what about people who are skipping meals or follow frequent fasting patterns? How does that affect sugar control and overall metabolic health?
So intermittent fasting is completely different from fasting and feasting. So intermittent fasting is a place where people eat for a given window period of time and then fast for the rest of the time. And it's proven by science that intermittent fasting is beneficial. Whereas, irregular ways of fasting and then, overcompensating it by eating a very heavy meal or eating late at the night is not good for the body. It's definitely going to cause a lot of stress hormones like cortisol go higher up in the body and might even push your sugars to a higher level, which is not advisable.
Also, Dr. Harshita, we have Karthik asking us a very important question. Okay, these are some of the hidden and misunderstood symptoms. He's asking, can issues like skin darkening, frequent infections, or even slow wound healing indicate sugar imbalance?
So yes, so skin darkening is one common thing, especially young girls, come to the OPD with. The medical term for that is called as acanthosis. It can happen in individuals who are overweight or obese because of insulin resistance, and it is generally seen at the neck area. Sometimes when it is severe, it can also be seen under your arms or in the groin area and other such areas. So it is a sign for us that the insulin resistance is building up in the body, and checking your blood glucose levels to understand whether you are a pre-diabetic or whether diabetes has set in makes sense. For a person who is already a diabetic with poor wound healing or frequent infections, it is an indirect indicator that their sugar control is not at a good place. So careful monitoring and checking how their sugars are and bringing them back under control helps in faster rate of healing of infections.
That's right. And Dr. Pooja, the Gen Z age thinks that people only who are older should realistically start testing for diabetes risk. But help us, break this and bust this myth. At what age should people realistically start testing for diabetes risk, especially considering today's lifestyle and stress levels?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Actually, what happens is you test early, you grab the pre-diabetes part early. So what has happened is initially the before part we used to check sugars only after 45 years of age and 50 years of age. But now the era has changed. We have seen diabetes in young people as young as 20-year-old, 12-year-old coming with pre-diabetes or diabetes. That is mainly because of, as you said, the sedentary lifestyle. And how we pick up in the OPD is they have signs of insulin resistance, as Dr. Harshita already said, the acanthosis nigricans or the skin tags or the increased waist size, the belly fat. So how early you have to test? As usually after 30 years of age, we ask them to test regularly. But earlier, if they have family history of diabetes or if they're having subtle symptoms, as already mentioned, and the third thing is if they're increased weight, increased BMI, and increased belly fat, or symptoms like PCOS, if they have sedentary lifestyle, irregular periods also. Young girls come with weight gain, irregular periods, and signs of insulin resistance. Then also we check for sugars. So depend, and if the patient has history of gestational diabetes, that is like the fast forward of the next 5 years happens in the 9 months of the gestation. So in such cases where high risk factors are there, we check earlier. Otherwise, it is advisable to check after 30 years of age. Yearly once health check helps you to give the tracking of sugars or the increase in lipids, which people think it as borderline sugars or borderline lipids, and where the body is overcompensating to maintain that level of sugars or lipids. So as I said earlier, the earlier you pick up in the reports, that's how you it gives a track of your to maintain your physical activity, diet, and lifestyle, as Dr. Rachana already said. So earlier you test when the symptoms are there, but usually after 30 years, I would recommend to check yearly once health check to be done.
Dr. Pooja, stay on with us because we have Nishit who's firing a lot of questions, but I'll take one from his list of questions. He's asking how much damage does our daily chai, sweets and late night snacking actually do over time? Because a lot of youngsters, they like to go out in the middle of the night, grab a cup of chai or probably, indulge in late night snacking. But how, harmful is it?
So snacking, I would say, would be better if you include healthy snack, not like junk food like bun, bakery, and biscuit items. And whatever you eat after 8 p.m., even the biological clock or the circadian clock, which we say the gut clock, the liver clock, which is controlled by this main, the circadian rhythm, also tends to slow down after 8 p.m. So whatever you take after 8 p.m., whether it is healthy food or the junk food or the midnight cravings which you have, all this will contribute to belly fat or the visceral fat, which we say, which is the most dangerous fat to get accumulated. So that's what I would recommend is timely meals like 8:30 breakfast, 1:30 lunch, and by 8 p.m. you have to finish your dinner. And especially the Gen Z kids who are always on this chai stall, tea stall, having tea with snacks and chips and all. So avoid as much as junk food as possible, especially they contain maida, which is the worst food available outside. So junk foods to be avoided, and after 8 p.m. Foods to be avoided. Dinner, have it before 8 p.m. and the plate method, as Dr. Rachana already said, that to be followed. And in case in between, if you feel hungry or if you crave for anything, take healthy snacks like roasted makna, roasted chana, or you can have one bowl of sprout salad. And if you want anything tasty, have some protein like one chicken salad. So that will help your cravings also to come down, and that will not increase your insulin resistance. So I would suggest late night dinners, late night coffee, tea to be avoided. Have it before 8 p.m.
Right, we've spoken about diets, we've spoken about home food, and now it's time for us to speak about the tests. So, Dr. Rachana, which tests give a more complete picture than just checking fasting sugar numbers?
Okay, so most common thing how they come to us is not even checking fasting. They come with only checking random sugar. So that's absolutely done at any time of the day. It doesn't give us much information other than if it's really high, maybe 400 or 500, it tells us that the patient really desperately needs help. But other than that, not much information by a random sugar. So for a comprehensive diabetic evaluation, we need to check the fasting sugars. Like ma'am said, we have to check the postprandial sugars. That tells us how good your body is in disposing of the sugar after a meal. And the most important test, that is HbA1c, which gives us the 3 month sugar average. So it says how your glucose levels have been acting in the past 3 to 6 months. So other than that, since diabetes is not only a glucocentric disease, so you have to think about the overall cardiometabolic health and the risk of the patient as well. So we do other tests like liver function tests, especially to check for something called fatty liver, because diabetes increases the risk of liver disease as well. And since we know diabetes is the most strongest risk factor for cardiac disease, for stroke, and for kidney failure, there are other tests like kidney function tests to say how fast your kidney is declining or is it normal? Is there any protein leak in the urine? And other important test is the eye test, which most of them forget because most of the eye symptoms, the eye damage does not have any symptoms until it reaches the end stage. So we mandate that every once a year, the eye screening has to be done. Other than that, important to assess your cardiac risk is your cholesterol also. Cholesterols have to be in a good range to minimize the risk of you having a heart disease. Having said that, it's just not about the labs. It's about the clinical examination, how we check the height, weight of the patient, the body mass index of the patient. And like Dr. Pooja said, we have to check the waist circumference to say it's the belly fat, which is the most harmful. So that gives us a risk of how this person is at a high risk for a cardiac disease or no. And like the others have told about insulin resistance, we examined like acanthosis, the dark patches. So all of this in totality will give you a comprehensive risk about where this patient stands having with diabetes and other complications in general.
Right, Dr. Rachna, we also have a question from Harshit, who is asking you, can chronic stress alone push someone from normal sugar levels into pre-diabetes?
Yes, sir. Definitely, it is possible. Stress and sleep are very important these days. A lot of, in the sense, importance is being given to that. That you should have at least 8 hours of good sleep should be there. And stress is a very important factor because it affects a lot of hormones in the body, which counteract the action of insulin. So one example can be cortisol. So when the cortisol level, when you're chronically stressed, not very small amounts of stress, when you're chronically stressed over a long period of time, definitely it can increase the hormones which oppose the action of insulin. So that can, if you are at a little higher risk, it can push you from normal sugars to having prediabetes.
And so far we've all, in the last 2-3 minutes, we've only spoken about, changing your lifestyle, completely changing it. So Dr. Harshita, can lifestyle changes truly reverse early risk if people act at the right time? And what is the right time?
Definitely, yes. So it's not just about reversing pre-diabetes. Even people with diabetes can, go into remission. The medical term is remission, actually. So what it means is that you follow a very healthy lifestyle and bring back down your sugars to the normal range by losing weight. So the whole idea behind remission is for people who are overweight or obese, you lose your weight and come back to the optimal weight zone so that the insulin resistance in the body drops and your blood glucose becomes better, your cholesterols become better, you are at lesser risk of a host of other major health issues. The one thing is act at the earliest, act even before pre-diabetes sets in. If you notice that you're obese or you're overweight, that is also the time to take action and not wait till pre-diabetes sets in and all that. By doing so, you will be delaying, even if let's say you carry a strong family history of diabetes or something like that, you will be delaying the risk of onset of pre-diabetes by several years down the lane. So acting as soon as possible, even when your sugars are normal, bringing down your weight to the right zone would be the correct time, rather than wait for pre-diabetes to set in and then work on it, or for diabetes to set in and then work for it. The younger, at the earlier or the younger your age is, the better will be the results.
You know, doctor, you spoke about fitness. So we have a question on that from Nikita, who's asking, many people rely on steps counts from fitness trackers. So is movement spread across the day more important than a single workout session?
Definitely, yes. When compared to a single workout session, movement throughout the day makes more sense in controlling, glucose excursions throughout the day and all that. As we all know now, sitting is the new smoking. So, adding steps throughout the day is much more beneficial than someone who works out, let's say, for half an hour a day and is sedentary for the rest of the day. So, aiming to be continuously mobile throughout the day is definitely going to be much more beneficial.
And now, Dr. Pooja, what are the biggest mistakes people make when they see borderline reports or early warning signs? Because they often shun it, saying, oh, this is just another, spike in sugar levels, nothing to be worried about. But there are, these are the silent signals. These are early warning signs. So what are the other early warning signs that people must watch out for?
Basically the early warning signs, as you already said, that there is increase in belly fat or there is increased fatigue after. Basically, patients come to me in OPD saying, as soon as I take my meals, we feel very sleepy. This is because of this reactive hypoglycemia, which happens because there is excess amount of insulin. So this excess amount of insulin suddenly brings the sugar down, and the person feels tired after eating. They will be like, I just had food, I'm feeling still tired. So the fatigue one part after eating or crashing after eating, increase in your waist size alone, and there is thinning of your limbs. So the belly fat is one important thing to be taken in mind, and there is frequent urination in the night, or frequent some wound is there, it is not getting healed properly, and some dental issues they have, like they have caries of tooth, or some extraction has been done and it is not healing. So these and some signs they notice in the body, there is increased pigmentation, there is skin tags, and in women especially there is irregular periods, and they feel tired, fatigue. So these are some of the symptoms which has to be picked up. And I would say even pediatric age group, the children also are coming now with obesity. So there is, because of this obesity, what happens is especially the girl child enters puberty faster. So now the trends we have seen, there is shift of trends in puberty also. People come at 9 years of age, 10 years of age, with uh, less 2 years less than the normal age, because of the obesity or the junk food. So basically from childhood to the adult, everybody has to keep a track of the subtle signs, where the if I show the WHO pattern for obesity, parents always choose a chubby child has to be normal. So they have to keep a track of the children's growth, the weight gain. And coming to the adolescent group, women especially are more seen to have irregular periods because of this PCOS pattern, which we say polycystic ovarian disease, where because of excess of insulin, there is excess androgen produced by the ovaries, and they have this facial hair growth, irregular periods. And coming to the age group where 20 to 30 years of age is there you usually have fatigue, reactive hypoglycemia, belly fat increase, and infertility issues have also been seen both in men and women, because obesity decreases testosterone levels, and even in women it causes irregular periods and infertility. So coming to 30 to 40 years of age, where people usually have the signs of insulin resistance is what is picked up. And usually on their reports, when they say that the HbA1c is between 5.7 to 6.5, the pre-diabetes screen, देखो चलते हैं थोड़ा सा diet कर लेंगे, then they do a little bit of crash diet, then suddenly stop it and regain the weight again. So all these subtle signs at each age group has to be picked up early, so that we have seen a trend of chronic diseases shift 20 years down the lane. So from 45 years of age, almost 20 to 30 years of age, people are also getting diabetes. So don't neglect these subtle symptoms, pick it up early and get treated. Medicines are not, people think that medicine is something that it is not good for them. So I would suggest take the help of medicines, improve your health regular. By that period, you can regularize your diet and exercise, and that's when medicines help, clinical guidance also helps in preventing pre-diabetes and diabetes, which has become an epidemic, and even the obesity part, which is so rampant nowadays.
That's right. And Dr. Pooja, we spoke about late night snacking, okay? But let me give you an entire differently, programmed lifestyle because of the current working, design. Many people work in the night shift and they don't work in the day shift. So we have a question from a viewer called Madhu who's asking, does eating late at night affect insulin response differently compared to daytime meals? Because daytime people working in the night shift are usually asleep and their body clock is used to the night pattern. So do you think having meals during the night spikes or affects the insulin response differently when compared to daytime meals?
Yeah, absolutely. As I told you, like after 8 p.m., all your metabolic clocks, especially the gut clock, the liver clock, and the pancreatic clock. So you can imagine the body as a whole system of clocks, which is running over time and has a rhythm. And this brain controls that rhythm. So after 8 p.m. or in the night, usually what happens is all your morning hormones, there is a slowness in your basal metabolic rate also. So if you eat in the night, so it is going to spike your sugars, and whatever the excess sugars are there, that is getting converted into cholesterol. Abhi body, in simple terms to say, so abhi body but doesn't know what to do with it, so it will say I'll store it as fat, I will see it later what to do with it. And basically this fat gets accumulated around your vital organs such as liver, pancreas, and that's when your visceral fat starts increasing. So late night eating also stimulates something called as cortisol, which has already been discussed. It is a stress hormone. So it is also a hormone which comes into action. So the entire rhythm which happens during the night, the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. sleep is very important. That's why. So whatever snacking or eating happens in that period usually increases your insulin resistance, adiposity, visceral adiposity, and that's where your insulin resistance starts. And whenever I ask if some people who are lean also having this PCOS symptoms are mostly late shift workers, late night workers, and when you do a body composition analysis for visceral fat in them, even though they look lean from outside, their visceral fat is bound to be high. So regular eating of meals, finishing your dinner by 8 p.m., and having a good sleep from 10 p.m. to morning 6 a.m. is very important for your metabolic health. So that's what I would like to say.
So what can the night shift workers do, Dr. Pooja? How can they, design their life according to their work timings?
Yeah, so what I suggest the late night workers is mainly if there is chronic shift of some people have 1 week night duty, 1 week morning duty, and some people have chronically night duties only. So the ones with chronically night duties, what I suggest them is finish off your dinner according to the metabolic clock by 8 p.m. And in case if they feel hungry in between, to have something like a healthy snack, like something like a salad. But usually, and the morning before sleeping, once they finish their shift at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., I ask them to take the morning breakfast, then go for a walk, then sleep. So that's how I ask them to maintain the schedule. So the eating pattern should be, so usually their shift is from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. it is there. So morning, have the breakfast, then go to sleep and finish off the dinner by 8 p.m. is what I suggest them. And 1 week night, 1 week day also, I usually tell them the same thing.
And Dr. Rachna, I have a very personal question for you. People have a notion that annual health checkups are very important, but what's the point of getting annual health checkups done when throughout the year you're doing all bad stuff, you're indulging in unhealthy habits through the year? So do you think annual health checkup after a year full of madness will help?
No, definitely. It's a very important thing to say. It's what's most important is being consistent. So many people before coming to the doctor, just maybe 2 to 3 months prior, sometimes just do some vigorous diet or vigorous exercise because they sometimes get told by the doctor that your sugar is so high and all of that. So in that way, people do some simple things and come just before coming to the doctor as well. But that's not what's important. That time, the sugar goes very high and sometimes very low. That kind of variability is very dangerous for the body. Actually, the body always prefers to be maintained in a stable state. So as long as you're doing something consistent, you're doing your diet, your exercise consistent for 6 months to a year, you will definitely feel much better. There is a lot of proven evidence for that, which says long-term, consistent these things, instead of doing any kind of crash diet, be it maybe keto diet, a low calorie, low fat, there are multiple 100 diets you can name, but following this simple plate method, choosing the right vegetables, just eating healthy, trying to avoid the maximum amount of junk, maybe just choosing it once in a while, maybe very small steps you can take, practice that for a week and see how it is going for you. So even though when we tell all of these diet changes, people are like, how can we leave rice? How can we leave ragi? They're all our staple diets, right? So what we tell them to do is instead of just ragi, add some other millets to it. And along with that, have a course of 2 bowls of fresh vegetables. Add a small protein in the form of egg or maybe curd, bowl of curd. So something like this, pairing it with the right kind of ingredients helps to flatten out this harmful effect of any kind of food what we're taking.
You know, people take it very personally and they get offended when you tell them not to eat their favorite dish or favorite dessert because it's not really good in the long run. Variations can really, harm the human body. And Dr. Harshita, speaking about variations, we have Abhishek who's asking us, can dehydration or low water intake falsely influence sugar levels?
Not exactly. Dehydration per se does not, kind of make your sugars very high. But when someone is a diabetic already and, the diabetes is not under control, so they'll be passing urine frequently and that way they would be, mildly dehydrated or something. And that also goes unnoticed. The body enters into a state of ketosis where an individual might be dehydrated. So it is the other way around, understanding higher blood glucose readings from the perspective of dehydration and blaming it on dehydration might not be the right way.
Okay.
So we tell people, especially when the sugars are not well controlled, if they are in the hospital under admission, definitely IV fluids will be the go-to to, kind of restore the fluid levels back to them. But if they are at home and managing their diabetes at a home level, drinking extra water generally helps, especially when your glucose levels are high, because you'll be compensating whatever you're losing out in the urine.
Okay. Dr. Pooja, now, speaking about fluids, many people are asking a lot of questions about fluids. I'll come to you all one by one. First question is from another person called Pooja. She's asking, frequent consumption of fruit juices and smoothies, do they spike sugar more than whole fruits?
Okay, from Pooja to Pooja. So I would like to say, see, what happens is we ask patients to take whole fruit. Why? Because there is a lot of fiber in it, and fiber doesn't allow the sugars to rise. So fruit also has fructose, which is also sugar. So fiber in it makes it healthy. So what happens is when you juice it or when you churn it or when you make it into a smoothie, the entire fiber portion, which is the most important part which we stress on, is completely gone. So what happens is from healthy fruit, it becomes to an unhealthy drink completely. So what people think that, okay, I had a smoothie today, they might feel full or it might keep it full. It might be like it's a diet thing. They have smoothie in the morning. So I would suggest to take a whole fruit is much more healthier than taking a smoothie or a fruit juice, which is completely unhealthy, no fiber, and it amounts to only sugars or calories and nothing more than that. There is nothing nutritive about smoothie or making it a fruit juice. So eating whole fruit is much better.
Okay. Now, speaking about, these were healthy fluids that we were talking about. Now, Dr. Rachna, we have Kishore who's asking us, how does alcohol intake affect sugar levels even when it is consumed occasionally? We have in the society, we have a lot of people. Some of them are frequent drinkers, some of them are occasional drinkers. Occasional drinkers, they say, oh, we don't drink every day, but we drink on occasions. So how, dangerous can occasional drinking also be?
It depends sometimes, in the sense occasional drinking sometimes can classify as binge drinking also, that at one occasion they drink a lot at that time. That is especially harmful because what alcohol does is it prevents your liver from releasing the glucose, whatever is present. The stores of glucose in the liver become very low. So when your body is really requiring glucose, at that time your liver is not able to release it from the is not able to release it. So that's what happens after a binge drink. Very occasional drinking acutely does not affect the sugar level. Like one drink and then you check the sugar may not affect it very vastly. But consistent, like if you keep having very frequently, then yeah, like this kind of thing can happen. And the other end of the spectrum is very chronic alcohol use. There are people with alcohol use disorder and other things. So that what can happen is after a bout of alcohol, they may not have food. So their sugar reserves are already low and the liver again is not able to compensate. So that can be an issue. And sometimes when they have low sugars, they may not able to sense it as well. So the symptoms of low sugar also, they may not able to sense. But one drink and we just check a sugar may not make too much of a difference for that acute level at that point. But
All right,
also, having said that, there's one important thing that chronic use of alcohol sometimes can cause pancreatitis. It's a very important thing. Pancreas is a place from where the insulin comes. So if your pancreas gets damaged in the process, then your ability to produce insulin comes down. And that is another kind of diabetes which we are seeing on the rise in India and as well as the world, which is called as pancreatic diabetes. So that's definitely something to be kept in mind.
Dr. Harshita, we have a question from a person named Vipin. Okay, he's asking how important is muscle mass in protecting against rising sugar levels with age? As they age, how important is muscle?
So it's the thing which a lot of people in OPDs fail to understand, especially in the context of diabetes and when they are very elderly. So exercise, unfortunately, is seen from the perspective of cardio only. Strength training is something which only youngsters do, is the common assumption. But strength training is for all ages. Strength training helps us build muscle mass. Usually, what happens is after the age of 30, they say with every decade you'll be losing some muscle mass, and it becomes more once you enter your 60s and 70s. So having a good muscle mass not only gives you strength, protects you from age related degeneration, and gives you good strength to walk around and be independent in your activities of daily living. It is also very important from a metabolic perspective. So all these glucose spikes that happen, especially after someone uses, that one of the common reasons why these spikes happen is that we as an Indian ethnicity have lesser muscle mass. So the amount of muscle that is there to take up this glucose is lesser. As we keep building muscle, there are more efficient ways of glucose disposal happening. So insulin resistance also comes down as we strength train, thereby our diabetes becomes better, and all other associated conditions like high cholesterols and other such things become better. So definitely strength training is an S for all across all the age spectrum and for both the genders.
But doesn't health, strength training and over, lifting of weights also lead to cardiac arrests? Because people get a wrong conception. They say that building muscle, will help me fight off sugar and diabetes, but that's not the way forward.
So, not necessarily. Unfortunately, some of these cardiac arrests have happened in gyms when people were working out. That we did have quite a few number of patients, especially every time a news event like this comes up. We do have anxious young people and people in the middle age group coming saying that they read a news article like this, or they had a colleague who was all good and suddenly collapsed and all that. So the idea here is that first of all, before if you are an sedentary person and suddenly deciding to start some physical activity in a big way, get a basic set of tests done to understand what is your cardiorespiratory fitness before you start something sudden. And strength training is not responsible for these cardiac arrests or anything like that. There could be some underlying issues which were unaddressed. Let's assume someone was sedentary for 40 years, did all things that could spoil their health, and there was some heart blocks or something which they never screened, and suddenly started exercising or something like that, it's going to put a load on a heart which is already weaker. So if you had a very unhealthy and a sedentary lifestyle in the past, first get a basic set of tests done, understand how is your cardiac health before you make major changes to your fitness journey.
So the basic takeaway is this, that do not avoid any early warning signs, because these small subtle signs could probably, multiply into something much bigger that you will not anticipate in the present. But it is very important for the future. But Dr. Pooja, if I have my sugar levels under control, but I have a very, very strong family history, should my prevention strategy be very different from that of my families?
Absolutely. So when you have a strong family history, that's where we say you are at a higher risk of getting diabetes early. So and regular checkup and picking up subtle signs. How regular should I check if I have a family history? That means usually we say an yearly health check. If says you are not pre-diabetic or diabetic, then a yearly consistent checking of sugars is very important. But if you are in the pre-diabetic range, then I would say 3 monthly check or 6 monthly check to keep a follow-up of how your sugars are behaving is very important. So high risk factors when you have, especially this family history of diabetes or family history of early cardiac death, where you have lost a family member less than 40 years of age, 50 years of age due to cardiac arrest, then all these high risk patients have to regularly check their sugar levels. One thing is checking. You don't have to only check. The second thing is maintaining your lifestyle also is very important in such patients, especially the diet and the exercise part, because they already have the risk factor. They are more prone in getting all these early. So a healthy lifestyle, like we already said, the diet, the exercise, the sleep pattern should be maintained, and minimum use of screen time is also very important. And all these put together, high risk patients should regularly check their sugars and have a healthy diet and lifestyle is what I would recommend. And in case if the sugars are borderline, also in such patients we aggressively treat them so that they are kept at check, because whatever the sugar rises, the excess sugar which goes above 150 or 200 is converting into cholesterol, which is getting deposited in your arteries, and that will over time increase the risk factor. So these microvascular complications and macrovascular complication, according to studies, have been shown that early control of hyperglycemia, there is something called metabolic memory. The body remembers what insult you have done to it previously. So suddenly you have this 10 years of unhealthy food, unhealthy lifestyle, and sudden pre-diabetic, diabetic, you don't control your sugars, then suddenly you feel the fitness you have to, even though the sugars become better, some amount of insult which has already happened, the metabolic memory which is there, the body keeps it in mind, and that's where you are at higher risk of complications. So high risk people, check regularly, maintain your diet, healthy lifestyle. And people also who are at early who get diabetes early, like 30-35 years of age, so they have a longer duration to stay with diabetes. So in such patients also, I would say they're also to check regularly and maintain a healthy lifestyle, so that these complications of diabetes doesn't happen. So metabolic memory is what I want to tell patients. Body remembers what insult it has been done with. So this is so better keep sugars under control. Don't just say that, oh, okay, these are just borderline sugars, I just have a little bit of sugar, nothing to worry. So that should not be the attitude, is what I want to say. Right.
And finally, Dr. Rachna, people say life is short, make it sweet, but that's such a very wrong statement. You can't really make it sweet, right? The more you make it sweet, the more you have diabetes and sugar issues. So before we close, what is your one message for the viewers who are watching us?
Okay, so today I think we have extensively discussed about what is diabetes, why it is so rightly called as the silent killer, and it is one of the major driving factors for the mortality in the country in the form of cardiac disease or a stroke or a liver or a kidney disease and all of that. So we have also discussed about how we can take simple measures to in our normal day-to-day life without making a very big change, but taking small consistent efforts every day to make a big change. So one takeaway message, what I want to say is before the sugar crosses the line, please get it into a hold. Your body will always give you very subtle signs to identify that something is wrong. Maybe not very alarming signs, but if you're be smart to listen to these kind of signs, pick it up early, recognize what they may mean, and test and treat early so that you can prevent all of these complications. Since diabetic, pre-diabetes, and obesity is like a worldwide epidemic, I think test, and treat, and to prevent complications early is the way to go now.
Right, Dr. Rachna, Dr. Harshita and Dr. Pooja, what an insightful conversation this has been, because diabetes doesn't announce itself suddenly, it develops quietly, step by step, and the real danger is not sugar on the tongue but silence within the body. So being smart means listening early, which clearly goes on to say that Samajhdar bano, sehat ke ishare samjho. This is the takeaway. Thank you, Dr. Rachna, Dr. Pooja and Dr. Harshita for joining us on this insightful conversation. Well, viewers, the takeaway is that you shouldn't avoid and you shouldn't ignore early signs inside your body, because these early signs could develop into a major problem that you will not foresee in the future. So whenever you pick up a sign, it's time you go to the doctor, get yourself checked up, and as it clearly says, Samajhdar bano, sehat ke ishare samjho. That's the takeaway, and thank you for watching.